Chapter 25. Now when Festus was come into the province after 3 days, he ascended from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Then the high priest and the chief of the Jews informed him against Paul, and besought him, and desired favor against him, that he would send for him to Jerusalem, laying wait in the way to kill him. But Festus answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and that he himself would depart shortly thither. Let them therefore, said he, which among you are able, go down with me and accuse this man, if there be any wickedness in him. And when he had tarried among them more than 10 days, he went down unto Caesarea, and the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, commanded Paul to be brought. And when he was come, the Jews which came down from Jerusalem stood round about, and laid many and grievous complaints against Paul, which they could not prove. While he answered for himself, neither against the law of the Jews, neither against the temple, nor yet against Caesar, have I offended anything at all. But Festus, willing to do the Jews a pleasure, answered Paul, and said, Wilt thou go up to Jerusalem, and there be judged of these things before me? Then said Paul, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews have I done no wrong, as thou very well knowest. For if I be an offender, or have committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. But if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, no man may deliver me unto them, I appeal unto Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, Hast thou appealed unto Caesar? Unto Caesar shalt thou go. And after certain days King Agrippa and Bernice came unto Caesarea to salute Festus. And when they had been there many days, Festus declared Paul's case unto the king, saying, There is a certain man left in bonds by Felix, about whom, when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me, desiring to have judgment against him, to whom I answered, It is not the manner of the Romans to deliver any man to die, before that he which is accused have the accusers face to face, and have license to answer for himself concerning the crime laid against him. Therefore, when they were come hither, without any delay on the morrow, I sat on the judgment seat, and commanded the man to be brought forth, against whom, when the accusers stood up, they brought none accusation of such things as I supposed, but had certain questions against him of their own superstition, and of one Jesus, which is dead, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. And because I doubted of such manner of questions, I asked him whether he would go to Jerusalem, and there be judged of these matters. But when Paul had appealed to be reserved unto the hearing of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I might send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said unto Festus, I would also hear the man myself. Tomorrow, said he, thou shalt hear him. And on the morrow, when Agrippa had come, and Bernice, with great pomp, and was entered into the place of hearing with the chief captains and principal men of the city at Festus's command, Paul was brought forth. And Festus said, King Agrippa and all men which are here, present with us. Ye see this man, about whom all the multitude of the Jews have dealt with me, both at Jerusalem and also here, crying that he ought not to live any longer. But when I found that he had committed nothing worthy of death, and that he himself hath appealed to Augustus, I have determined to send him, of whom I have no certain thing to write unto my Lord. Wherefore I have brought him forth before you, and specially before thee, O King Agrippa, that after examination had, I might have somewhat to write. For it seemeth to me unreasonable to send a prisoner, and not withal signify the crimes laid against him. Here we have in chapter 25, Festus, who is the new governor. He arrives at Caesarea. Caesarea is 70 miles northwest of Jerusalem. It's at sea level. Of course, it's right on the coast. And it talks about going up to Jerusalem. That's because Jerusalem is at the high point in the entire country at 2,600 feet. Technically 2,550 feet above sea level. And to the Jews, Jerusalem is the high point in every aspect of life. It is the high point of their spiritual life, the high point of their temporal life. It's the biggest city. The holy city is located on the high hills of Judea. And everything is up to Jerusalem, up to Jerusalem. And in the New Testament, it uses that phrase 22 times. Westerners often use an idea of a place as north as up north, whereas the Holy Land, it's the area is actually the Sea of Galilee from Jerusalem is considered down north because it's lower down in elevation. So anyway, the Jews that were there, verse 7, the Jews laid many and grievous complaints against Paul, which they could not prove. These Jews probably would have been servants of the Sanhedrin, which was the highest Jewish council. They would have been as members of or servants of the Sanhedrin, the so-called experts of their day regarding the law of Moses. They would have, there were 613 commandments in the 5 books of the Torah, and then there were thousands of others with the things that you could and couldn't do with the rabbinic tradition. These were the people who were so hypocritical, so morally corrupt, that they would never even walk through a field of grain on the Sabbath day for fear that they might step on a seed of grain and plant it. But they had no problem trying to figure out how to get Paul killed by ambush. To them, the commandment of thou shalt not kill, which is Exodus 20 and 13, obviously didn't mean anything. They didn't mind bearing false witness against Paul before Festus either. So Christ warned his apostles about the leaven of the Pharisees. These guys who would strain at a gnat while swallowing the camel. And this chapter is a really excellent example of exactly what the Savior warned against. The leaven of the Pharisees was being willing to consider that you are so righteous that everybody else is just a moral midget by comparison, when in reality these people were the moral midgets themselves. Now, in verse 11, he said, Paul, they ask him, would you go up to Jerusalem to be judged of me? And he basically says, no, I appeal unto Caesar. Verse 11, under Roman law, every citizen of Rome accused of a crime had the right and privilege to be heard before the imperial court. The authorities on Roman law, that local magistrates had local powers where the appeal was concerned. They could decide if a case was an appropriate kind of case to be heard. But obviously, if a person was a Roman citizen and he wanted to be tried in Rome, that was pretty much it. It had to be an appropriate thing. But if your life was on the line, then obviously that was an appropriate thing. In verse 12, he's asked, if you appeal to Caesar. Okay, Festus basically says, if you appeal to Caesar, then unto Caesar you shall go. And King Agrippa here is Herod Agrippa II. He's the son of Herod Agrippa, who is the one who basically was given the speech in this brilliant silver robe, and basically they said it's not the voice of a man, it's the voice of a God, and he sort of took credit for it and was immediately struck and died 5 days later. This one is the last of the Herod's family. He's accompanied by Bernice, who's his sister. And he is the king of Judea, but he is serving underneath the Roman emperor. And again, he's the last of the Herodian kings. He's impressed by Paul, but not enough to do anything about it.